Chase Thomas podcast. My nephew needs me to record. See, I already hate it. I hate it.
All right, hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Chase Thomas podcast, where I'm still the aforementioned Chase Thomas, coming to you live from Knoxville, Tennessee, Everything School HQ, where I am joined by the illustrious, not Fangraphs own John Taylor, up there in
New York City.
Oh yeah, John Taylor. He's back talking baseball. And John, it's a great day for baseball because I listened earlier today, some around the house. I'm like, Buck Showalter on foul territory. And Buck Showalter, man, he's now on my must get on the pod at some point managers, because the man's not, because some older managers, you know, they don't like, you either go one of two ways. You either take the changes and everything else and how human beings evolve and how different people are over time. You either take it in stride and enjoy it, or you go the angry, the grumpy old man. Like you go one of two ways. There's never a middle ground. And Buck Showalter is he's fun, man. I listened to it and I'm like, who can't like Buck Showalter? Like, it was one of my favorite managerial interviews I've ever heard. So I highly encourage people to go check it out. Buck Showalter, A+.
Yeah, the older a former manager or player gets, the more likely that they're just going to hit fuck it mode, where they're just like, I don't have to protect anyone anymore. Nothing matters. I can say whatever I feel like. The gold standard with this is retired Hall of Famers, because no one can tell them shit about anything at all. But a guy like Buck, who I'm 99% sure that his gig with the Mets is going to be his last managerial gig. I can't imagine that he's what now, 70, like somewhere in that general range.
Well, he said he's open, and like one of the things, but he was clear. He's like, he's just an ethical dude. He was like, I don't really want to talk about it because I don't want other people to talk about other people's jobs while they have them and this, that, and the other. He was like, if something comes up, you never know. But he's not going to speculate on other people's jobs. So it's hard to say if Buck Showalter's already coached or managed his last team.
Yeah, I mean, I think the odds are probably pretty likely that, he's 67. His time with the Mets obviously didn't go particularly well. I think he's kind of lost that kind of what do you want to call it, that sheen of being like a guy to take over kind of a struggling crew, given how things played out with the Mets. You never say never, but I think
Bruce Bochy probably helps his case though, right?
Yeah, I have to imagine that's true. Although Bochy at least is coming from a place of, hey, I won 3 World Series, whereas Buck's whole thing has forever been, I'm the guy you fire before you win a World Series.
And it's sad because Buck's awesome. I feel like players like Buck. I would like to play for Buck.
Which is, I think, always been one of his selling points is, I'm a player's manager in the sense that these guys like and respect me and will play hard for me. Which I think was mostly the case with the Mets anyway. It just seemed... It's funny when people talk about last year's Mets team and what went wrong. I've read like half a dozen like in-depth reported pieces on like what happened to the 2023 Mets, and no one can really seem to agree on any like one specific or tangible thing as to what happened. It just seems like, and to sound like a Gen Zer, it just sounds like the vibes were off for that entire team, and it just they would not have passed a vibe check. So, yeah, but I don't know. But either way, whether or not Buck comes back to the dugout, I get the sense that he is in his kind of like a tenured professor who just doesn't have to teach a class anymore, and it's just I can just kind of say and do whatever I want at this point.
He's earned it.
He's earned it. Yeah, I mean, that's the other thing. He's been doing this job for 3 decades now, 4 decades, whatever it is. Buck has earned his time on the farm, so to speak.
I'd like him in a booth or something. I don't know where he belongs, but I think he has if he wants to do it, I think he'd be good. He'd be interesting insight, and just and his openness to analytics and his openness to the people aspect to it. I don't know. He's just your kind of modern, older, established manager. I don't know. I hope Buck gets one more crack somewhere.
I think it's certainly possible. I just wouldn't bet on it.
Yeah, that's fair. What I wouldn't have bet on, John Taylor, is Theo Epstein ever returning to the Red Sox in any kind of meaningful capacity. And yet...
Yeah, I wrote that one off years ago.
Is that where we are, John Taylor? Explain to me what the latest this week with Theo Epstein, and how much has that changed how you feel about where the Red Sox might be going?
So it's hard to know exactly, because these senior management advisor positions, whatever you want to call them, that it basically exists as a way to give, in particular, retired older guys like Buck Showalter
Mm,
a job and a place to be and a connection. They're always very vague in what exactly the responsibilities of these guys are. And
mm.
if anything, they kind of just seem to be like a job retraining program for like fired general managers to just go kick it somewhere for like a
It's like
couple
what Nick
years.
Saban did at Alabama with all the analysts. Like you get fired, you go spend a year or two as an analyst off the
Yeah,
field working under Nick Saban to rehab your image and get ready to.
exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah, or the way that like former GMs will just pop up and rant, like the way Heim Bloom popped up in the Cardinals front office all of a sudden. It's
yeah.
like, yeah, we've just hired him to do stuff basically.
The
And
Mets
I
did that
think,
too for a little bit. Remember, like JP Ricciardi, Sandy
yeah,
Alderman, and there was a lot of people.
Paul DePodesta too
Yes,
before he decamped for the NFL. Which, is he still with the Browns, or where is he now?
I don't think so. I think he's
Okay.
out. Yeah.
And as far as I know, with regards to with Theo Epstein rejoining the Red Sox, I don't think that there's been necessarily any what's it called, any real definition as to what exactly he's going to be doing. It's, his officially he's been announced as a part owner and senior advisor, and it's worth noting here, not of the Red Sox, but of Fenway Sports Group, the John Henry led ownership consortium that owns not just the Red Sox but also Liverpool, Roush Racing and NASCAR, the Pittsburgh Penguins, I think at least one or two other sports concerns. They have obviously fingers in a lot of different pies, and I think it, at least on a personal level, for Epstein, who his last job after leaving the Cubs was working with Major League Baseball, in terms of, and he was particularly focused on field improvements. I think he was one of the working forces behind the pitch clock and a lot of the other on-field changes we've seen in the last couple seasons that have been very, very that have worked pretty well and that seem to have been pretty popular. I get the sense he's not necessarily going to be all that involved in the Red Sox day-to-day stuff. I think this is in part probably setting him up to get into that ownership track where
Mm.
he is fully in, like, full owner of something or another. Is it going to be the Red Sox? I mean, that I think is probably the most interesting part of this. Is, does this say anything about a potential John Henry ownership succession plan? Um, for all of the complaining I've done about the Red Sox, and it is all valid and good. Um, the sense that we've gotten with John Henry and with Fenway Sports Group is that they're not really willing to play the game of let's spend a lot of money in pursuit of a title.
Mm.
To say nothing of the fact that Henry is 74 years old. He has won, obviously, several World Series titles with the Red Sox. He's won a Premier League title and a Champions League title with Liverpool. He owns the Boston Globe. He's worth many billions of dollars. There aren't really many mountains left for him to climb, which I think is
Mm.
probably a large part of why the Red Sox are where they are. So I do wonder if this is more about kind of setting up a future and bringing back someone whom he clearly trusted and liked, leaving aside the acrimonious split, which I think, for what it's worth, seems to have been more of a Larry Lucchino versus Theo Epstein thing than it was a John Henry versus Theo Epstein thing. Who knows necessarily,
It's
but
also the ultimate vibes hire. Like we talk about down bad, where I forgot what that video, wherever they were, where the vibes for the Red Sox was Henry the one who was there, where it was just like really really sad. What was he? And it was just I forgot where it was. Some kind of it was it the winter meetings or something. I don't remember what was going on, but it was not that long ago. We were like, oh, it's morose, and were they booing John Henry? Maybe were they
it was
booing him?
probably one of those like off-season like fan festival things. But
Yes. And
but the
it
sense
wasn't
I
going well. But the ultimate bring back, like, hey, we're back,
yeah.
is Theo Epstein.
And look, I think especially the timing of the announcement and the way it is kind of, it's just senior advisor, where it's like,
Mm,
I think it's designed as a PR thing to be like, hey, for all of you guys complaining, look who's back, the guy who broke the curse or whatever.
mm,
And again, I don't expect Theo Epstein to be involved in the Red Sox on a day-to-day level. Like, clearly this is about getting him involved at an ownership level and across various different sports, because like I said, Fenway Sports Group's portfolio is diverse and vast. Like, there are
mm.
many things he can get involved in. I think this is probably his way of getting more involved in the ownership ranks, if that's something he wants to do. Maybe he wasn't feeling the same kind of pull from working in the league offices anymore. If there is one interesting wrinkle, it's that Epstein was the one who hired Craig Breslow in Chicago to work for the Cubs. So there's clearly a connection there, which I imagine probably didn't hurt in terms of bringing Epstein on board. Is like, hey, one of my trusted guys is already here, and there's already an established existing connection. But it's hard to say what it means beyond that, in part because, I can't imagine that Theo has any real sway in terms of either ownership decisions or front office decisions. Then I really doubt he would come back in order to do that. It seems like, again, given the personal connection with Breslow, I can't imagine he'd be coming in to try to Bigfoot his former guy. Like that doesn't really scan to me. So I look at it more as getting him involved with people he already knows, with particularly in a situation which he's already familiar, which is to say, at the top of a Red Sox org chart, to get him into potentially let him explore and see, okay, not just do I want to get involved more in the ownership ranks, but also, is it baseball? Is it hockey? Is it soccer? I think similar to the way Billy Beane kind of pivoted away from, once he was no longer general manager of the A's, pivoted more into, I'm more interested in soccer, or I'm just going to explore what other sports are interesting to me. I wouldn't be surprised if that's kind of the way things end up going with Theo Epstein at FSG, kind of similar to how things have played out with Billy Beane in his kind of post Moneyball days.
Either way, it can't hurt. Theo Epstein joining the fold again.
There's no downside at all.
No, which is where you really want to be. So we'll see what that ultimately means. But hey, when you get a PECOTA projection like the Red Sox got this week, you got to do whatever you can.
Hey, Fangraphs playoff odds are out too, and they agree that the Red Sox are a team in the American League East.
Well, we'll get to that as well, and we'll compare PECOTA and Fangraphs and the playoff rankings on this very show, because we're fans of both PECOTA and Fangraphs on this show. John Taylor,
this is a BP and FG friendly podcast.
Absolutely. Something I was thinking about this week, John, is like, it's now official in terms of barring injury. The top 3 for the Los Angeles Dodgers is going to be Mookie Betts, Freddie Freeman, and Shohei Ohtani.
Yeah, that rules extremely hard.
Not for me when I have to play the Dodgers, maybe multiple times, multiple series, as a Atlanta Braves fan here, John Taylor. Historically, where does that rank? When you just hear prime Mookie, prime Freddie, prime Shohei, does that have a case, and we'll see it play out like the greatest 1, 2, 3 we've ever seen? Because you think about it and you're like, that's 3 NL MVP favorites to start off every game, and we'll hit. It's just crazy to actually say that out loud, right?
It is kind of funny to think that those 3 probably are the immediate 3 Vegas favorites for winning NL MVP odds, and that you have the last year's AL MVP winner, last year's NL MVP runner-up, and I believe Freeman finished 4th or 5th in the voting
somewhere in there
last year, something like that. It might have been 3rd. I can't remember, but it's hard to say because baseball history being as long and varied as it is, I'm sure you and I could probably sit here for a good long while and come up with just terrifying trios. It's because I think the easiest way in my head to go about it is, okay, well, let's find how many times did they put future Hall of Famers together in a lineup. One that just jumps to mind to me is I think what complicates it a little bit is that by this point, these 2 guys were no longer necessarily at the peak of their powers, but the Biggio, Berkman, Bagwell days in Houston. Although that's the thing, by that point, Biggio wasn't really a force anymore. His last really good season was 1998. Berkman's first season in Houston was, and I'm just looking it up now, was 1999. So they overlapped for a little bit, but by the time Berkman turned into a middle of the lineup force, Biggio was already kind of shifting down into his more of a pesky slap hitter type position than what he was. Similarly with Bagwell, that was trending toward the end of his kind of more productive years. That one just jumped out at me. The 2009 Yankees, I think, looking back, just because I remember, anytime you have a lineup with A-Rod in it, that's kind of hard to beat. But, having Jeter, Damon, Teixeira, A-Rod, 1, 2, 3, 4 in that season is just frightening to think about. OPS plus figures for those guys: Teixeira 141, Jeter 125, Damon 118, A-Rod 138. That's impressive. Those guys were top 4 in that lineup pretty much every single day. So that I think is another really good option. I want to pull up StatHead to try to see, what if you can find. Let's see, it'd be most players on a team in a season matching criteria. So let's do it from there. Any to any, regular season, non-pitcher. I'm sure for those folks who are listening, it must be very fun to listen to me narrate a StatHead search. But let's just do this. Let's start with OPS plus 120. Status filters. I don't know. We need to have a minimum playing time of some kind. Minimum 500 plate appearances, because that's the other thing that is really worth noting with the combo of Mookie, Freeman, and Shohei. Those 3 guys are pretty much guaranteed, given how steady they've been, how good they've been at avoiding injury, with the exception of Ohtani as a pitcher. Those 3 guys are going to be in the lineup for 145 games apiece. You know, you can take that to the bank. That is a really dependable trio right there. So that's also important too, is finding the guys who are in the lineup day in, day out. Okay. I think in terms of this is the StatHead search. The team with the most players, regular players with an OPS plus over 120, the 1969 Cincinnati Reds. Johnny Bench, Alex Johnson, Lee May, Tony Perez, Pete Rose, and Bobby Tolan. There are 6 other teams that meet that criteria. The 1978 Brewers, the 1982 Angels, the 2003 Red Sox, led by Nomar, Bill Miller, Trot Nixon, David Ortiz, Manny Ramirez, and Jason Varitek. I'm a little embarrassed that one didn't immediately come to mind, but whatever. The 2009 Yankees, the 2017 Astros, which we'll put a decent-sized little asterisk next to that one, but that obviously was a phenomenal lineup. That was peak Altuve, Alex Bregman, the one good year of Marwin Gonzalez's career, peak George Springer, peak Yuli Gurriel, the last good Josh Reddick season. And then I would not have guessed this, the last team in this group, the 2022 New York Mets, with Pete Alonso, Mark Canha, Francisco Lindor, Starling Marte, Jeff McNeil, and Brandon Nimmo. So it's actually pretty recent that we've had, the last 4 teams I mentioned are all within the last 20 years. The Mets obviously is only 2 years ago. And that team had at the top of its lineup, if you look at their most used batting orders, which also while I'm doing this, I can't say enough good things about Baseball Reference. It is such a cool just tool to be able to do this kind of stuff. That top 3 was Nimmo, Marte, and Lindor, with Pete Alonso batting cleanup. That's a really good top 4 as well. So, it's going to be up there, though. I think that top 3 is probably going to be up there. I mean, if we want to restrict those even further, let's just have some more fun with this. Let's look up the 2023 Los Angeles Dodgers to see. Okay, so Freeman finished with a 161 OPS plus last season, which is ridiculous. Mookie Betts finished at 163, and Ohtani, as a hitter, finished at 184. Jesus Christ, this guy's a mutant. All right, let's do this then. Let's get really silly. Adjusted OPS plus over 150. We'll even put a decent sized floor there. How many times has a lineup had 3 or more guys with any number of guys with an adjusted OPS plus over 150? Let's wait for it. Okay. We have 10 teams in MLB history that have had 3 or more hitters in the same lineup with a 150 OPS plus or better. The most recent, the 2004 St. Louis Cardinals with Jim Edmonds, Albert Pujols, and Scott Rowland. So by that criteria, assuming that, and of course, we're not going to assume that they're going to put up exactly the same numbers last year, but just setting that as a floor, the last time we've seen 3 guys in a lineup this good was 20 years ago with a Cardinals team that made it all the way to the World Series, only to run into a mythical, wonderful Red Sox team that, by the way, I should mention in case people have forgotten or didn't know this, a Red Sox team that was down 3-0 in the 2004 ALCS against the New York Yankees, only to come back and win the next 4 games, the first time that's ever been done in a best-of-7 series in MLB history. The Red Sox did it against the New York Yankees. Just want to remind people because, some people don't know. But it's a pretty narrow group. I mean, half of these teams played before 1900. 6 of these teams played before the Second World War. The only post-integration teams on this list, the 1963 Giants with Orlando Cepeda, Willie Mays, and Willie McCovey. The 1964 Twins with Bob Allison, Harbin Killebrew, and Tony Oliva. The 1996 Mariners with Ken Griffey Jr., Edgar Martinez, and A-Rod. And as I just mentioned, the 2004 Cardinals with Edmonds, Pujols, and Rowland. Keep in mind of the names I've just mentioned, Cepeda, Mays, McCovey, Killebrew, Oliva, Griffey, Martinez, A-Rod, Pujols, or Roland. That's 9 Hall of Famers plus Pujols, who will be 10 when his time on the ballot comes up. It's really, really rare to get that much like just star power in a lineup at the same time. So yeah, to eventually get around to answering your question, we haven't seen something like this in quite a while. We don't normally get stuff like this. Again, it's only happened 4. Sorry, did I say 3 or 4?
I think you said 3.
4 times.
Yeah.
Since integration, 4 teams in the last 80 seasons roughly of baseball have done this. And the Dodgers are almost certainly going to do it next year. Oh, and by the way, they also have the best Yoshinobu Yamamoto, who every projection says is going to be a top 15 pitcher. And like even leaving aside Ohtani, Freeman, and Betts, they also still have Max Muncy and Will Smith and James Outman, who very quietly had a 2020 season last year, and Gavin Lux, who when he was healthy was one of the best prospects in baseball. Like, this Dodgers team is going to be so good, man. They're going to be so good. It's going to be so much fun to watch. I want to just fast forward us to the Braves Dodgers NLCS, which almost guarantees that we're now going to get like a Reds, Reds. I was going to say Diamondbacks, but they already did it. I want to get a little new Reds, Marlins NLCS. I think Rob Manfred would like quite literally jump out of a building if it were Reds Marlins NLCS, but notwithstanding, yeah, what the Dodgers are doing, what they've already done in assembling this roster is special. I'm really excited to see how it all plays out in reality.
Yeah. Well, good news for every NL team, especially the great teams in the NL West. It's going to be fun. We're all going to have a great time.
That's the fun thing for the National League. Is like, hey, the Braves and the Dodgers are 2 of the best teams like literally ever.
Mm-hmm.
Have fun, Good luck. Enjoy.
They'll be fine. Well, it doesn't matter because like a third of the league's still not trying.
No.
John Taylor.
Yes.
Speaking of teams not trying, this team is trying. Corbin Burnes, after we recorded last week, traded.
Like literally the day after.
Yes. And I feel like we're responsible based on our conversation about new ownership and this, that, and the other.
That's true. I forgot that's what we've been talking about too, is that Orioles ownership fans should be excited. Turns out we were 100% correct as usual.
Yes.
That they should be excited because new ownership 100% made that trade happen.
It's pretty great. And your reaction when I texted you the Corbin Burnes news was, and for that? So break down, John Taylor, what this trade means for Baltimore and what this says about Milwaukee and their new era that they are ushering in here.
Yeah, so it's easy to, the Baltimore side I think is the easier one because it's pretty straightforward. The Orioles get a projected top 15 starter in the majors, which is, and we've talked about it more times than I can count, the thing they needed more than anything else this offseason was to get a number 1 starter, not just a guy who can give you 180 plus innings in the regular season of above average baseball, but a guy who you can send out in game 1 of a playoff series and know, not just feel, but know we have this. Because this is our guy. This is our dude. And I'm not saying, Corbin Burnes is not automatic by any sense, but again, this is someone who, when all the projection systems do run their stuff, and I think, I'll just go straight to Prospectus since PECOTA is out now. You look up Corbin Burnes or Corbin Burnes' projections. You're gonna get a guy who is going to finish somewhere in that top 15 or 20 of starters overall. Something the Orioles did not have, and that's even with very optimistic feelings about Kyle Bradish and the fact that Grayson Rodriguez is still one of the more talented young pitchers in baseball, but you didn't have that kind of guaranteed excellence or that body of work that you feel more comfortable at, to say nothing of, now you're also less worried about the Orioles pitching depth because you do have Burnes and everyone moves down a step. Now you're not necessarily relying on Cole Irvin having to give you 30 starts in a season. Now you're not necessarily relying on Dean Kramer having to be better than league average, which is something that is not necessarily a guarantee. Am I not logged into Baseball Prospectus? I'm not logged into anything. This is so irritating. I wasn't logged into Baseball Reference. I'm not logged into Baseball Prospectus. My pets' heads are falling off. It's an absolute disaster over here. But with like I said, with Burnes, it's pretty straightforward for the Orioles. Number 1 starter, which is what they needed, what they didn't spend money on in this offseason. Here are the PECOTA projections for those who are curious. 29 starts, 175 innings, 193 strikeouts, a 329 ERA, a 358 FIP, an 80 DRA minus. And for those who don't know what DRA is, it's deserved run average. It's Baseball Prospectus's proprietary deserved. They have it for offense too. Deserved runs created. DRA minus of 80 works the same way, I think, as ERA minus. The lower the figure is, the better. 80 is very good, obviously. 3.5 wins above replacement player. That's phenomenal. Again, that is a top 15 starter in the majors. That's something the Orioles desperately needed. I think it pretty much cements them, despite what the projections are saying currently, in my mind, as the best team in the American League East. On the other side of things for Milwaukee, I don't think you and I are necessarily surprised that Milwaukee did this. There had been a lot of smoke this offseason that Burnes was going to get traded. I think it was more or less a given, particularly with how poorly things played out with his arbitration hearing, not this offseason, but the offseason prior, where it became abundantly clear that Milwaukee had no real intention of paying him his worth either over the course of a full season or going forward. And the Brewers are just not a team that hands out big extensions. And for a guy like Burnes, who was guaranteed to go onto the market next year as the number one pitcher in free agency, he was going to be looking for minimum $180 million in free agency. I think you could argue whether it's Burnes or Wheeler or Zach Wheeler is the number one guy, but one way or the other, he was going to be looking for a big 9-figure deal. We knew the Brewers weren't going to do that. To a certain degree, it was only a matter of time before they made this move. What I don't like about it, and while this is not a vote against the prospects they received. Joey Ortiz is a great middle infielder, good defensive second baseman, more likely than not, good solid hitter, the kind of guy Milwaukee really excels at developing. Similarly with DL Hall, a dude who has a ton of talent from the left side, a lot of injury and control issues. But again, Milwaukee is a good pitching development organization. I think they'll be able to get the best out of him. For me, it's less about what they received and more about just the quantity of it, because, or not even so much the quantity, about what it says going forward in terms of this is a Brewers team that, even though they had felt like it taken a step back this offseason to some degree, still was very much in that race for the NL Central, but not in a way where it's like, this is not a team like Houston, for example, or to give a better example, I think the Dodgers, or even the Braves, where you feel really confident being like, yeah, they're going to win that division by like 5+ games. They've got some margin for error. You can trade away a guy like Corbin Burnes if you feel like either one, you're confident that you're going to win the division pretty handily, or two, you've got the reinforcements in-house to make up for it for the most part. And ideally, three, you then turn around and use that money saved to fix some of the other problem spots you have on your roster. But with the Brewers, they don't have that margin for error. The NL Central is almost certainly going to come down to 1 or 2 wins, separating the first place from second place, if not third place too. And as we saw last year, it's going to take a minimum of like 84 wins to make it into the wild card spot in the National League or something along those lines. Both PECOTA's standings and Fangraphs standings have the Brewers, I think, right around that 80 to 83 win territory. That's a real danger zone for them. That is basically the borderline of the playoffs. And, losing Burnes takes them from being, I think, a comfortable NL Central contender to one where they've really put themselves at risk that a better than expected year from Cincinnati, or a better than expected year from St. Louis, or a better than expected year from the Cubs immediately puts them at a disadvantage, especially because they don't have a guy right now beyond Freddie Peralta ready to step up and take that spot Burnes had in that rotation. I like DL Hall, but that's not going to be DL Hall. On top of already losing Brandon Woodruff to an injury that's going to cost him the entirety of this coming season and that ended his Brewers career. The Brewers have put themselves in a scary place here, I think. Yeah. And I can understand it from the financial perspective of Burnes is walking at the end of the season. We're not going to get anything back for him except for a compensation pick when we make him a qualifying offer and he rejects it, But at the same time, this deal, I think, would have been there mid-season. What I don't really understand is the decision to do it now. Jordan Montgomery got more or less the same return. Not the same return in terms of position player or in terms of the positions played, but in terms of the overall value of what you got back as a mid-season deal. And with all due respect to Jordan Montgomery ain't Corbin Burnes. Again, Corbin Burnes is a number 1 starter, one of the 15 best in baseball. It really feels like there should not have been a rush to move him. And if there was, why aren't you getting back more than an infielder and a back of the rotation arm when you have holes on this team that need to be filled. And look, some of that money, it seems like Milwaukee's already using it. They just signed Gary Sanchez today to be either William Contreras' backup or to be a guy who frees Contreras up to be a DH more often than not, or for Sanchez to be a DH more often than not. We'll see. Obviously, there are some pieces to be moved around there. But it's really, at this point in the offseason, unless the Brewers are going to turn around and give $200 million to Blake Snell, which that's not going to happen, it's not going to be possible for them to make up what they're losing in Burns. And what they've lost in Burns may very well be the difference between winning the division or even making the playoffs and nothing at all. And I think when you're in a position like Milwaukee's is, where not only is every single win super vital, but because of your financial restrictions, you don't have that ability to do like the Dodgers and just build a super team and put yourself in a position where you're now a World Series favorite. You have to take advantage of every opportunity you've got. And I think moving Burns, again, I understand it from a financial future perspective, but it pretty much cuts them off at the knees in terms of being a real World Series contender. And look, I don't know that the Brewers were going to be a real World Series contender with Corbin Burns. I don't know if they even would have been the NL Central favorite with Corbin Burns, but it does put them at a significant disadvantage going forward that I don't know how they plan on addressing that beyond hoping that some of the guys they already have in their system, be it now DL Hall or someone like just need to pull up their depth chart really quick because I don't know the entire Brewers rotation off the top of my head. Or maybe it's someone further down currently in their system like an Aaron Ashby or one of their better prospects like a Jacob Misiorowski, or Robert Gasser. Like maybe that's the hope, is that one of these guys can kind of take that step up and be 70% of Burns for 10% of the price. But that's a really risky strategy for an already small market team like Milwaukee is. So I get it for them. I really don't like it for the Brewers. I just do not like that deal for the Brewers. Again, in particular, because I think this deal would have been there in July. And I think they would have had that opportunity too with a lot more desperate teams in the mix, as opposed to during the offseason especially when you still have Blake Snell sitting out there ready for anyone to sign. When I think in July, you might have had more of an opportunity to catch a team at a desperate moment and say, hey, we got a number one starter right here. To say nothing of, also at that point, you're halfway through the season. Maybe you're in a position to buy if you're the Brewers and supplement what you've got. But, I think now they just put themselves in a position where they have to play catch up. And I just don't like that for them.
I think the Brewers they're like doing they're doing the sad teardown where they're just going to do a little bit at a time to let people know that we're not trying to be like the Royals, or we're not just the A's. We're not going to do something egregious. We're not going to really rip this down to the studs, but we're going to just casually make this really annoyingly 75 to 80 win team for the next 3 to 5 years.
And I think it's a conscious decision. And I think it also, if you're wondering why Craig Counsell left for Chicago beyond the fact that the Cubs offered him a truck full of money, and why David Stearns would leave for the Mets beyond the Mets offering him a truckload of money, I think is probably the understanding that ownership was not going to spend the requisite amount of money necessary to keep this core together. And I think there's probably an understanding on Milwaukee's part that this particular era of the Brewers, the Corbin Burns, Christian Yelich, Brandon Woodruff core, is over. And the transition now begins to a team led by Jackson Chourio. And I think I can understand why. Again, this is not a team that makes big long-term signings. That has necessarily the financial flexibility, or at least so we are told, that Mark Atanasio, the owner of the Brewers, is not a big spender by any stretch of the imagination. But it's still a bummer, because I feel this anytime a team trades a guy like this and kind of commits itself to, like you said, that 75 to 80 win kind of portion of the cycle, it's just such a bummer for fans to be told flat out, hey, we're not putting in full effort here. If we get lucky and everything breaks right, we might make the playoffs, and in the process, we're going to save some money for the organization going forward. But my take is always, as a fan, you should not care one iota about how much money your owner spends on building a roster. You should want them maxing out their figurative credit card, if not the literal one. You only have so many chances to win in this league, and when you already have a core as good as Milwaukee's is, and it's a good core, it's not a great core, but it's a good one. I struggle to understand why you would want to, again, cut it off at the knees and rob yourself of that opportunity unless everything goes not as everything goes exactly right for you, but also everything has to go particularly wrong for everyone else in the NL Central. Because again, this is going to be it's a bad division, but it's going to be a tight one. There's no runaway favorite here. There's no team that's projected to finish anything better than 85 wins. It's a shame to me. It's a shame the way some teams treat their fan base that way in terms of just kind of being very cynical about, we're not going to win, so why spend the money?
It's not great.
It's not great.
I would be very the Brewers. I just feel like still to me are they're in that worst case scenario as a fan because you're not gonna bottom out and at least try to revitalize and get this thing going. Now you're just your manager just got stolen. You're just gradually trading away your best pieces. We'll see what Christian Yelich eventually gets moved for and guys like that, but I don't know. You're in a division that half the teams don't try in a given year. It's just going to be kind of depressing. I'm sorry, Milwaukee fans. I wish I had a more optimistic view of where things are headed over the next couple of years, but just everything about this screams quiet teardown and not bad enough to get those number 1, number 2 overall picks to really change things.
I don't think it's necessarily a teardown. If it is, it's one of those kind of skinny rebuilds where it's we're still going to contend. We're just not going to spend much money.
I mean, they're not going to contend. They're not contending. This is not a contending roster, right? You don't think this is a team that can win the NL.
I think they can definitely win the NL Central, but win the pennant? No. I'd put the Brewers' odds of that at roughly 2%. I mean, if you look going over to Fangraphs, newly released 2024 playoff odds, they have, and these are odds all obviously calculated post Burns trade. They have the Brewers 33% to make the playoffs and 1.1% to win the World Series. So, which to give some context is roughly the same odds that the Padres have. And no one is going to go, or similarly the Mets or the Marlins, and no one is going to go into the season being who I really like to win the World Series? The New York Mets. Well, maybe some Mets fans, but it's actually probably not even the Mets fans. They've probably all given up by now.
Well, we'll see. John, the Royals gave Bobby Witt Jr. the biggest contract in franchise history, beating
by a factor of 5. They never signed anyone to $100 million deal before, and they gave Bobby Witt almost $300 million.
Which is crazy. And then I realized, because I was who's the highest before this? Oh, Salvador Perez. And I was this is relatively, the Royals really just don't spend money. You just see it and you're wait, Salvador Perez? And no shots against Salvador. Great all-time catcher for them. The fact that he's the all-time...
Not since the halcyon days of Ewing Kauffman owning the team have the Royals really been spenders. And those days ended roughly 3 decades ago. So. Yeah.
But he quietly really, really performed well. I think because the Royals are bad and they're just one of those teams to me where if you're just elite on a team like Kansas City, just so much of the country has no idea it's happening. It's I feel like
Carlos Beltran syndrome.
Yes. And he's a superstar. You go through his stats. I didn't realize just how good they were last year. What does this mean for Casey? Because I think it's interesting in terms of, I think I texted you this too. John, who do you think spent the most money and has the highest payroll in 2024 in the AL Central?
It's the Kansas City Royals.
It's the Kansas City Royals. So they lock up Bobby Witt Jr. Great pick, great development. He's a huge win for them. And then they sign some guys to fill out this roster.
They have definitely signed this Royals roster. The guys they have signed this offseason are going to be very much a part of any 2020 remember some guys grouping.
And then there's 2 schools of thought here, right? It's hard to separate these if you're a fan or if you're just you're like us and we're just analyzing what the Royals are up to here. They want a new stadium. The Royals want a new stadium, and they would like the public to fund a lot of said new stadium.
Yes.
To get some interest, some fan interest, and some public support, the team needs to be better than what we've seen the last couple of years.
Very much so.
So the Royals are spending money again. The problem is you look at Pacoda and Fangraphs and you're they're going to have the highest payroll in the AL Central and the wins aren't really coming here. So I don't know what to make. If this, do you look at these moves as still sound, and like even if you remove the stadium aspect to this, like does this still look like a quality, smart offseason and how they should have operated this year?
Yeah, I think you're right that this is not a Royals team that's going to contend. Again, going back to the at least just because I'm already here, the Fangraphs 2024 playoff odds, they've got the Royals projected to go 75-87. That's a 10.8% chance of making the postseason, which, granted, that's not nothing. On the other hand, it's the third lowest odds in the entirety of the AL. The only teams with worse odds to make the postseason are the White Sox and the A's, both of whom have effectively stopped trying. The A's have literally stopped trying, and the White Sox just, I mean, only by the grace of the White Sox, more likely than not, will the Royals avoid finishing in last place. However, I think what's really important about this Royals offseason is the understanding from last year that you have to have a higher floor, because that Royals team last year was an abject disaster. Again, they lost 106 games. They were awful, and not just awful, but unwatchable. So I think, and I do think the stadium does really play a big part in this, in terms of when you add guys like Hunter Renfroe and Michael Wacha and Seth Lugo and 3-time World Series champion Will Smith, which is just never going to stop being funny to me. You're not doing it because you're under the expectation that those guys are suddenly going to change this from a 100-loss team to a 90-win team. That's not going to happen. But you are doing it with the expectation that you're going to go from 100 losses to like 90, to maybe even 85, to who knows, maybe you get lucky and you take advantage of the fact that this is a weak division where, the Guardians aren't really trying, where the Tigers are kind of caught in between after the kind of failure of their last rebuild attempt, where the White Sox have just flat out given up. And then you think to yourself, hey, we're probably not going to beat the Twins. We may not be as good as Cleveland, but there's a chance here that we finish somewhere like second or third in this division. And then we have real momentum going forward. And look, like, are Michael Wacha and Seth Lugo and Hunter Renfroe going to be part of the next great Royals team? No, those are short-term guys brought in to help prop up a roster at positions of need, particularly in the starting rotation in the bullpen, where the Royals got very, very little production. But you raise the floor, you build momentum, you show fans that you're still trying. And even if it's showing fans that you're still trying solely for the purpose of trying to squeeze money out of them so you can get a new stadium, well, at least you're still trying. And if nothing else, with the Witt move, which I love, by the way, I think Witt is exactly the kind of guy you signed to a long-term deal, a la Fernando Tatis a few years ago, ideally with better progression, but still. You show them, too, that we're not just building to be better now, we're building to be better in the future, because that's what Witt's all about. It's about showing you that, hey, we are making this commitment. We're going to have this guy here forever. And for fans, that means so much. Be like, you're always going to be able to identify with this guy. Guys like Michael Wacha and Hunter Renfroe will come and go, because that's just the nature of free agency with older veteran players. But there's always going to be Bobby Witt. You can feel comfortable as a Royals fan buying that Bobby Witt jersey, knowing that he's going to be there. You're going to get to watch him spend his career with this team, and you're going to get to watch a core get built around him. But I think this is where the real issue for the Royals crops up, though. Is right now that core is Bobby Witt Jr. and Cole Ragans and Vinny Pasquantino, and then nothing else.
Yeah.
This is a team hyper deficient on young talent. They have,
and that's what they should have been theoretically building the last 5+ years.
This is the extreme problem with the last few years for the Royals, is that they failed utterly, with the exception of Witt, and not to take away too much from the Royals, but Witt was as like easy. That's a layup. That guy was the number 2 overall pick, was arguably the best high school player in the country the year he got drafted, and it's the son of an ex-major leaguer. That is as easy as it gets in terms of player development. In particular, it's the pitching where they failed so badly. Where the guys like Jackson Kowar, or to a certain degree Brady Singer, or some of the other guys they've now got floating around down in the minors like Daniel Lynch or Alec Marsh. Those guys have just not clicked yet. And they probably never will, to a certain degree. And that's the real big problem for Kansas City. You look at their farm system, which coming out of the 2023 season, Fangraphs had rated, I believe, 27th in the majors, somewhere in that bottom 5. Not one single 50 future value or better prospect in that system right now. And not just that, but you look at that farm system and where most of their guys are, it's still going to be a couple years before you start seeing some of these dudes make it to the majors, if they make it at all. You know? This is signing Witt is not a sign that there's this immediate transformation on the horizon. It's more that, well, now we have a foundational piece in place so that ideally, if and when these guys are ready, Bobby Witt's already there. And so is Vinny Pasquantino. And so is Cole Ragans. And so is whoever else, so is Nick Lofton, their current top prospect. But I mean, I don't want to sugarcoat it for Royals fans. It's still going to be a rough season.
Yeah.
Maybe. And that's the thing. I think the best case scenario for this Royals team is something like a 500 record. And that would be an astonishing development.
Does that win the AL Central?
That's the sad thing, is it could, but it's, I think more likely than not is, and I feel like I'm in line with what Fangraphs says, is like 75 wins. That's a big step up from last year. That's actually close to competency. But it doesn't really matter what happens this year unless you can couple it with significant forward development and advancement in the minor leagues with your prospects and a really good draft on top of that. That's what the Royals.
I just don't know if I'm going to bet on that.
No, and I don't want to bet on it either, because aside from Ragans and Witt, and again, Witt was kind of a layup.
Yeah.
We have not seen signs that the Royals know what they're doing when it comes to player development over the last, really since they won the World Series. It's been a long time since we felt like the Royals knew what they were doing in that regard or another. And look, they're going to get, I'm just looking up quickly, they're going to get a top 5 pick, I believe, in this coming draft. I know the Guardians have the number 1 pick, which is never going to stop being funny to me. I love that there's a draft lottery just for stuff like that. The Royals have the number 6 pick, which is fine. It's not supposed to be a great draft, but that's fine. They have now Witt locked in for the long term. But again, it really is all going to come down to, can they elevate the farm system? Can they get that player development on track? Because otherwise, this is going to play out, like you said, as it has with more or less every single star player that the Royals have had, with the exception of that brief World Series run, where it's just one shining star in a heap of garbage.
Go Royals.
Go Royals. I mean, look,
Maybe.
Royals fans should be happy, if nothing else, that Witt will be there. He's a really easy player to root for. He's a supreme talent. He's exactly who you want to build your franchise around. So in that respect, at least, this Royals offseason has been a home run. They've done great work this offseason. It's not going to add up to a championship, barring the 28 other teams like falling into a giant sinkhole. But it's a step forward, and particularly it's a good sign, even if it is a cynical, well, we want a new stadium, so we got to make the mouth breathers happy.
Right.
Like, it's a good sign that at least Kansas City knows what a competent offseason looks like to a certain degree.
I agree. Final thing here, we'll do Pacoda and Fangraphs next week. Let's make that the theme of next week's show, breaking those down and what we like and what we don't like, or we're thinking and how we're reevaluating based on what the numbers are showing here. Jose Altuve it's funny things we talk about in this pod, and then we're like, it's either going to be Tucker or Bregman or Altuve. Who's going to be the final one? And we wondered for years, right? Like, who is going to be the one final? The Astros were going to do it for somebody. Like, somebody was going to get the Astro for life tag.
It was set up so perfectly because both Altuve and Bregman were set to be free agents at the end of the offseason. It was going to be that hard choice for Houston of, well, which one do we keep? Because we're probably not going to be able to keep both.
Yep. And they kept Altuve, and that's what we predicted last week. So Altuve officially an Astro for life, John Taylor.
Yeah, barring something weird. And I think it's the right decision for both, I think, in that for Jose Altuve means more to Houston, and thus is worth more to Houston than he would be to any other team in baseball.
Yeah.
And, you can look at it from a standpoint of, he's 35 years old. He's no longer particularly good. He was never really a good defensive second baseman. That continues to trend downward. Why are you giving this guy a 5-year, $100 million plus deal for what will almost certainly be the worst years of his career? And I think the answer is, and what I find so surprising that they've done this, particularly because Houston has a Belichick Patriots level degree of like unsentimentality when it comes to, to handing out contracts like this, is because it's worth it to them.
Yeah.
Because those kinds of things do matter. It does matter to be able to say Jose Altuve was an Astro for life. When he goes into the Hall of Fame, and I have pretty full confidence at this point that Jose Altuve, assuming that he doesn't just, lose all his limbs sometime in the next...
Oh, wait, are we sure Altuve is a Hall of Famer?
it's a bigger debate. I think if nothing else,
writers are going to hold a lot of stuff, I suspect.
Well,
over those Astros.
What I'm curious about, and I think we'll see that. What we'll see is how it's played out with Carlos Beltran, and whether or not Beltran, by virtue of being the first guy from that group to face the writer's wrath, essentially ends up soaking up a lot of that damage and leaving it clearer for a guy like Altuve, who, it's also worth noting, very less conclusively connected for sure than either Beltran or Alex Cora, or even to a certain degree Alex Bregman.
But doesn't he feel like, I mean, the memes and everything else with him covering his jersey, this, that, and the other, like, I just feel like he's, fair or not, kind of the face.
I think to a certain degree you're right, but I also think that by the time he retires, which let's assume he runs out the course of this deal, we're talking about 10 years from now is when is when writers are going to start debating those questions.
And let's be perfectly clear, it's not like a performance enhancing thing. It's just and we'll never know for sure what all, like, that will never be completely known. But we're just saying, like, we're just speculating as to whether or not Altuve the narrative will work for Altuve, because narratives matter for guys getting into the Hall of Fame. And I just don't know what the narrative, and like you said, we don't know what it's going to be like and what the temperature for those Astros guys are going to be like 10 years from now.
I mean, I will say that I do think there will be guys who are or writers or voters who are just dead set on being like, no, he won't get in for me because he was involved in this thing. We don't know how much, but I mean, not knowing how much didn't stop anyone from making guesses on steroid and PED stuff with guys who were conclusively not connected to it, like Jeff Bagwell or Mike Piazza. It's not going to stop writers and voters from doing that with Altuve. But I do think the shape of his career so far, the likelihood that he gets to 3,000 hits. I mean, you look at where he's at career-wise now, over the course of the last, this is going to be his 14th season in the majors, which is insane for a guy with his particular build. He's over 2,000 hits now. I don't know if he gets to 3,000, but if he doesn't, he's going to get very close. I think close enough that it might as well be 3,000. To say nothing of, I think his particular, especially when it comes to being him as a hitter, I think with his ability to control the strike zone, with his phenomenal bat control, some of the best in the majors, there's a prospect there. This isn't a guy who relies on his speed or hyper athleticism necessarily. This is a dude who I think can age relatively well. I think there's a good chance. I think he's at the very least in the conversation as a Hall of Famer. Again, we'll see how the next 5 years play out. But with regards to Houston, too, I think they also understood that it wasn't going to cost them terribly much to do this. Because the other side of this is, what would it cost to extend Alex Bregman? And similarly with the Brewers and Corbin Burns, I think you're looking at a number that begins with a 2. As in, I think it's going to cost a minimum $200 million to get Bregman to a long-term deal, as he's a younger player, a better hitter, a better defender, a more just an overall just better player, I think, than Altuve is at this stage. So I think the Astros understood, okay, we don't know what this is going to look like. It's almost entirely unlikely that Bregman will take any deal we offer him unless it's way over what he would have expected or what we would feel prudent. But with Altuve, they didn't necessarily get a discount, but they didn't have to go. They're not stretching their money terribly much. It's a front-loaded deal too. It'll be a little easier to swallow the decline years because of that. And I think there's, again, not only is there something to be said about the value of a franchise having that guy around for the fan base, but also just for the stability he provides. He's very clearly a super important player in that clubhouse and for the leadership of that team and just for the model and example he sets. And I think Bregman is similar. Bregman, one of the real shames of the trash can scandal is that Bregman is the kind of player that, every high school coach across the country points at him and goes, that's the guy. That's the dude you want to be, is the kind of baseball rat that Bregman is. But I think Altuve is a very similar player to just a guy who loves the sport, loves to play the game, gives 100. This is all Jeter cliches, but 110%, intangible effects, blah 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 blah. So yeah, I think it's a good move for Houston. Obviously, it makes sense for Altuve. He was never going to get this money, I don't think, as a free agent. It would only really ever made sense for him to stay with Houston. I think it's good. I think it's just good for both sides overall, even if it doesn't work out necessarily on an on-field level, because again, these are going to be the worst years of Jose Altuve's career, almost certainly. It still matters for what it means to Houston, to the fan base, to the roster itself, especially to see, to know that guy is going to be there and to be able to kind of like go into spring training knowing that that's not hanging over their heads anymore. We'll see what they do with Bregman. Again, I'm incredibly skeptical that the Astros will work something out with him before he hits free agency. But if he does reach free agency, there's no rule that he can't re-sign with the Astros if that's what it comes to. I think it just makes sense for Houston to have gotten this piece of particular business out the way, so that they then now can turn their focus to, okay, what does Bregman want? Okay, does a Kyle Tucker extension make sense? What can we do to keep this core together for as long and as functionally as possible? Because, and this is something too worth noting with Houston, the future, with the exception of being built around guys like Yordan Alvarez and Kyle Tucker, this farm system has definitely slid in the last few years. This is not the same organization that's been pumping out, top prospect after top prospect, or instantly turning pitchers into Cy Young candidates. Some of that, of course, is just draft position. Some of it too is the very real brain drain that has affected the Astros over the course of the last 8 or 9 years now. That's a very real thing that's very hard to replace. I think it means something too to Houston to be able to keep this core and cast together as long as possible, to just get as much out of them as possible, because I think the Astros know, or at least understand, that the future is not going to be super kind to them. This is, again, at the end of the 2023 season, the 29th ranked farm system in the majors, according to Fangraphs. Like, this is not a terribly good farm system. It does not have a lot of super high upside prospects. Those that it does have are still a few years away. So I think it makes sense too to have that continuity with Altuve, to have him extend that window as long as possible. So I like it for Houston, even if the money part of it does, even if the numbers attached to it do feel a little like, how did he get that much?
It's also just, it's going to be fine. Like, it's probably going to be ugly those last few years, but
for sure, 100%.
It doesn't matter. He won you the titles. He's the face of your franchise. Like you said, we'll see if he makes the Hall of Fame. But either way, like the Astros are all in right now, and this is going to get ugly the last couple of years. No matter what, it's worth it. It's all worth it, and we'll see what it all means for Houston. But either way, Jose Altuve, it's always cool to just see guys where it's like there's no question if they do make the Hall, they won't be in Jim Leyland situation where they just go in with no cap, because we don't know.
The best joke I saw about Jimmy Leyland was that he should have the Marlboro logo on
I
his
love
hat,
that. Yes.
Which I 100% co-sign. But yeah, there is real tangible value to this guy. Was an Astro for life, and if he goes into the Hall of Fame, it's going to be with an Astros cap, and he's going to be connected to this franchise forever. Like that
I'm fascinated with guys like Freddie Freeman, though. Like, I don't know. Braves fans might. I genuinely. Again, we'll see years from now, but there are certain ones where you're like, I can't wait to see how it goes and what the response is with certain hat choice picks. It's so silly, but
yeah, it is silly. I mean, regardless, when Freddie Freeman gets into the Hall of Fame, I'm sure Braves fans will turn out in big numbers. But I do think,
if he's here I don't know what he'll pick, actually. I assume Braves, but
I think he might be the kind of guy to go with the blank cap.
I just hate the blank cap.
I do too. I wish there were a different way to handle it. But I do think he's going to be one of those guys where it's like, I don't want to disrespect either fan base, and I adore, obviously he has very deep connections and feelings to Atlanta, to the franchise, to the city. I can see him being one of those guys where it's like, even though I won and plus he won a World Series in Atlanta, obviously. He has yet to do that with the Dodgers, but
hopefully
I can
that continues. Many are hoping that it continues for the foreseeable future, not just
Braves
folks.
Braves fans coming up to me with tears in their eyes saying, "Sir, can you believe that Freddie Freeman hasn't won a World Series with the Dodgers?" But yeah, I can see him being one of those guys who it's like, out of respect to Atlanta and the fans who I care about so much, I'm going in with no logo on my cap, because he doesn't want to.
I just don't like it. No, that shouldn't be allowed. Pick a side, coward. You got to pick one.
Freddie Freeman, you coward. Hurt someone.
Yeah, like, just pick someone to hurt. Just pick someone, Freddie. You got to do it, man.
Rip the Band-Aid off. Make it
You
sting.
really do. I don't think Mookie's going to have a problem.
No, Mookie is 100% going to go to the Hall of Fame as a Dodger, and I'm going to cry like a tiny child when that happens. So,
could the Red Sox have... Was that a... Hold on. Mookie, what? Boston? What... That could have been like a long-term guy for y'all, right? Like Mookie,
yeah, for sure.
I'm doing a bit, John. I was doing a bit.
Why did I fall for that?
I was trying to make it as obvious as I possibly could.
Every week. No, for a second there, I just thought you were having a stroke or something.
No,
I was about to ask if you could smell toast.
I don't ever really smell toast. I don't make toast that much. So if I ever smell toast, I know I'm having a stroke because I
that's a good
never
point.
make it. So if I'm
Okay, that's good. You're not a toast guy?
bread's
like
fine
toast.
cold.
I like
don't need-
toast because it's a whole different meal. It's like someone looked at bread and was like, I know what I can do with this, and they made a whole new meal just by setting it on fire. Great.
The only time you'll get toast from me is grilled cheese. That's about it. But
Okay, that's fair.
I mean, I went through a panini phase in my mid-20s when I was really bougie. Like
Panini phase. We all have one. We all have our panini phase.
my panini maker was so fucking disgusting in my mid-20s because you're supposed to clean it all the time, and I'm just like, oh, I'll get to it.
Oh yeah,
and
no, having a panini press is a terrible investment because, like you said, you're just scraping melted cheese.
Yeah.
Off of that thing constantly.
I mean, just who knows what I inhabited from using that for a long period of time with no thorough deep cleans ever really partaken there. But whomst among us hasn't gone through their panini press phase here in their mid-20s. John Taylor, thank you as always, my friend. More Major League Baseball next week on this show, and I'm excited to see which team does something else major. Who's your prediction? Which team does something right after we get done recording?
Someone has to.
I'm gonna say Cubs.
I say the Giants with Blake Snell because I think if they go into spring training with things as they currently are, I think that fan base is going to check out completely. Because boy, things are not good there. Things are really not good in San Francisco.
I mean, shout out to Grant Brisbee. Keep taking pictures of San Francisco and why it's a good place to live, and maybe you can turn the narrative around.
Blake Snell and be like, don't you like Vietnamese food? Huh?
Don't you like the sea lions? Look at the sea lions. They're nice.
They're cool. Yeah, hang out at Fisherman's Wharf with that dude who would hide in the bushes and scare people when they walk by. Maybe the Giants should sign him. I don't know.
There you go. John Taylor, always a pleasure, and I'll talk to you next week.
Sounds good.